Uncharted: The Lost Legacy is the newest installment in the beloved Uncharted franchise. This DLC turned full game is the first not to star Nathan Drake. Set 6 to 12 months after Uncharted 4, the fan-favorite treasure-hunting Chloe Fraser of Uncharted 2 and 3 partners up with the previous side antagonist Nadine Ross of Uncharted 4. Together, they travel to the Indian Peninsula, a land struggling under a civil war, to find the lost treasure, the Tusk of Ganesh. Like any Uncharted game, it's a race against time to find the treasure before the villain does, Asav, the game's new antagonist. Ever since developer Naughty Dog switched to the PS3, they have pushed the boundaries of emotional storytelling. With every new installment, the stories became more character-focused, centering around personal growth and robust, interesting individuals. With The Lost Legacy, it's no different. Chloe's more realized than ever, and as a character I personally hated in A Thief's End, Nadine Ross became just as lovable, and by the end, I was happy to have her along as my partner during my time exploring India's ancient temples. If you were thinking Nathan's wit would be lost in his absence...
Hey, check it out. Marco.
Really?
Come on.
No.
Marco.
You would be wrong. Chloe and Nadine's chemistry, charisma, and constant banter easily cement themselves as being just as clever leads. At the start, you can feel the unease and tension in their back and forth, but as unlikely friends as they are, you can feel the relationship between the two organically and realistically change in a way that only Naughty Dog can. Chloe does a great job as the game's new protagonist, bringing her dry humor and brash personality into the mix. She has ample knowledge on Hindu mythology, as well as some personal stake in the journey ahead. She controls the same as Nathan Drake, being a well-versed parkour/mountain climber, and is no stranger to a gunfight. Nadine Ross has been more fleshed out than from her villainous days in Uncharted 4. She's the more serious, by-the-numbers member of the team. Throughout the game, you learn of her past, family, and what she did between A Thief's End and now. Staying true to her mercenary profession, she's an unbelievable help in game. During combat, she more than once took out enemies that were giving me a hard time, and outside of combat, she would even help me out with repetitive puzzles. There was once when I was doing a puzzle, and instead of backtracking across the map to move a light fixture, Nadine called out willingly and did it herself. That may seem like a small feature, but puts her very highly in my books as far as AI is concerned. Like any Uncharted, it's a pulpy Indiana Jones-inspired adventure, filled to the brim with cinematic set pieces, treacherous obstacles to climb, elaborate temple puzzles to solve, hordes of enemies to fight, and lost treasures to find. The parkour, as an Uncharted staple, is your main form of transportation, and just like in A Thief's End, it's as smooth, responsive, and fun as ever, traversing the jungle, rope swinging to safety, and death-defying dangling over the most beautiful and breathtaking of landscapes feels amazing. Of course, you can always spam the climb button to perform feats of superhuman abilities, but these are not mandatory and are there for those who wish to speed through the climbing sections. And as much as I'll be the person who prefers more realistic climbing in games, especially in its more leisurely moments, the fast twitch climbing feels right at home during the action set pieces and mid-combat. Now, the combat is something I personally have gripes in. I feel cover-based shooting is more restrictive and contradicts the free-flowing action associated with every other aspect of the game. Though it may have been hip and a popular style in the early Uncharted days, it feels out of date in 2017. At times, the gunplay can be awkward, with chest-high walls littering the battleground. That would press me up against the wrong side of the wall and into the line of fire was an issue, and having the roll and cover button being the same gave me problems that related to a number of my deaths. Uncharted 4 did its best to refine the combat system, especially in CQC, making each hand-to-hand fight feel organic and just as cinematic as the rest of the game. The tag team fighting between Chloe and Nadine feels especially refined, making their teamwork seamless and without the clunkiness you might expect from an AI partner. Stealth is something I remember being a wonderful addition in A Thief's End, promoting an alternative way to combat, and because I personally adore stealth games, it was the perfect thing to add to the one big blemish I found with Uncharted games. And with The Lost Legacy getting a silenced pistol, I expected the stealth to be amped tenfold, but unfortunately, stealth only granted me a few achievements, and not the Solid Snake Ghost I wanted to be. Having spent lots of time sneaking from one end of the map to the other, I was met with doors that couldn't be opened without alerting all the enemies in the area. This, unfortunately, isn't an alternative to combat, but instead used to preemptively strike to make the ensuing gun battle less hectic. Another Uncharted staple, and arguably its most known feature, is the action set pieces and scripted sequences, putting you in the heat of the action, and playing out what in other games would be a cutscene for you to watch. Love them or hate them, these are super over-the-top moments that make you truly feel like the adventurer the game portrays you to be. If you have played an Uncharted game before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Uncharted The Lost Legacy has its fair share of jaw-dropping action moments, making you feel like you got by sheerly on luck and by the skin of your teeth. Some take inspiration from previous ones in the series. Amazing on their own, but these could be considered the greatest hits, making many callbacks to prior games. This time around, puzzles took a bit more of a front seat than usual, an aspect of the game I thoroughly enjoyed. Though there were the mundane disc spinning to make a picture puzzles, and some outrageously simple crate moving puzzles that'll make you wonder why on earth they included them in the first place, but the game harps some true head scratchers that aren't hard enough to warrant a blood-void look at a walkthrough, but just difficult enough to satisfy. With one puzzle in particular, where you jump on platforms to avoid decapitation, I found extremely amusing. Chloe brings the new fancy ability of lockpicking to the table. This may seem like an odd addition, but I found it added to the decision making mid-battle. I can't just make a break for a crate I know is holding an RPG to take out an armored vehicle. I need to know I won't die mid-lockpick, which is why I think it brings another layer to planning out your attack, which I enjoyed. It's apparent developer Naughty Dog loves to poke fun at itself. Chloe acknowledging that things always come in threes, self-referencing the fan-hated box-moving puzzles and removing them entirely, and noting of Sam's sudden appearance that retconned Nate's origins in Uncharted 3 was a bit of added humor I didn't expect to see from his own series, and I appreciated its inclusion. For a couple of chapters, the game centers around your Jeep. You drive from place to place completing missions and temples in any order you choose. Though the driving may seem like a bore, the two protagonists keep each ride interesting, giving it important and humorous exposition, filling in the gaps between games, and not to mention, all of the driving is cleverly preparing you for the automobile-eccentric finale. All in all, the gameplay is fun, easy to pick up with a low skill ceiling. But because of that, I'd recommend the difficulty be best switched to easy. Unfortunately, any game with chest-high walls doesn't reward greater skill for players willing to pick up a harder difficulty. They only prolong how long you'll be waiting behind a chest-high wall. With a lower difficulty, you get to run, jump, and swing around like the action star you are meant to be, brushing off stormtrooper aim like a boss. The Uncharted series is no stranger to gorgeous, breathtaking landscapes and scenery, bringing you to grand vistas, lush jungles, skeleton-filled catacombs, caves filled with beams of light, grand-scale statues, and hidden temples that verge on spectacle. Though I'm sure the graphics are no different than from Uncharted 4, the change in scenery really emphasizes what the engine can handle. Never have I stopped advancing in a story just to take a break and look at the scenery. But I guess that's why they added the in-game photo mode that Chloe takes advantage of herself. It's one thing to throw something big in your face, call it huge, only to interact with a small part of it. Like a giant enemy that may seem like a skyscraper's big brother, but you only ever interact with its fists. It's another thing completely when the game has you interact with an object in its entirety. It truly took me aback when I saw this vast statue of Ganesh, and where some games it would stay like the wallpaper poster it was, you proceeded to climb it. The graphics and setting are truly amazing. Everything feels authentic, making you better feel like you're part of the adventure. Uncharted The Lost Legacy will run you between 6 and 8 hours, depending on how fast you want to run through the game. I went ahead and did the side missions and took my time to find hidden treasure, and it only took me 7 hours to beat the game. Sadly, it only contains a total of 10 chapters, whereas Uncharted 4 had 24, counting its prologue and epilogue. Now, that might be a red flag for some of you, but at its price, I think it's well worth it. Being that this is DLC turned full game, it doesn't get a full $80 AAA launch cost, only costing you $40. A game model I really hope continues for more game developers. Henry Jackman continues to do the score much like he did in Uncharted 4, and I gotta say, as much as I didn't think it had any songs that were memorable enough that when you hear them, they are instantly recognizable, so when they are reprised in the later act, you can be like, oh yeah, that's so-and-so's theme. But the soundtrack was still on point, enhancing every moment from the somber, majestic, or adrenaline pumping. Though I did hear some repeat songs from A Thief's End, this is definitely a soundtrack I'll have on my phone and be listening to for a very, very long time. The game makes good effort to give you incentive to replay it after you've beaten the campaign, with higher difficulties, new outfits, treasure to collect, and some fun things like new modes that let you go slow-mo, or renders that make the game look like the inside of a Snapchat filter. But unfortunately, these things only held my amusement for a couple of minutes. Whereas the novelty is nice, most of the fun modes and filters render the game unplayable. The multiplayer is the same as Uncharted 4's, as in the same servers, so if you have the Lost Legacy and your bud has Uncharted 4, you guys can still play together. The multiplayer is the same as what you'd expect from any of the Uncharted online games, multi-layered maps, and climbing for better positioning. Uncharted 4 multiplayer brought grappling hooks, mystic items, and money you can use mid-battle to spend on a variety of things to aid you. The Lost Legacy brings a horde mode wave into the mix. The survival mode is what you'd expect. You and 2 other players combat waves of enemies that range from hard to impossible. And I don't know if I just suck, but every single game mode I entered, I couldn't even get past the first wave. The Lost Legacy did have a very satisfying and fun ending. I was glued to the edge of my seat during the game's final act. It was an amazing end to what may be the first in more games starring these new leads, and I'm very excited to see what Naughty Dog has in store for the future of the Uncharted series. The game was an amazing experience, but felt very much like Uncharted 4, and if I'm judging it as a standalone title, as much as Chloe and Nadine had an amazing chemistry, there was no heart-gripping moments like in the fourth. Unfortunately, Uncharted The Lost Legacy suffers from the same faults as its predecessors, and without anything new to bring to the table, the overall experience felt very been there done that. But if you come in wanting more Uncharted 4, then this is definitely the game for you. Now, I always found in reviews having a number out of 10 means very little, so I'm going to do things a little bit differently on my show. So, I'll say, if you enjoyed the previous Uncharted games or any of the Tomb Raider games, then this is a must-play. If you haven't played any of those and you enjoy action-adventure type games, then this is definitely worth a look. But if you very much dislike cover-based shooting and aren't a fan of that old genre, then this isn't the game for you. And that's my review for Uncharted The Lost Legacy. If you guys had an opinion on the episode, don't forget to hit one of those thumb buttons or leave a comment below. And if you want to see more from me, hit that subscribe button. I release content like I guess I do a bunch of things. I don't know, I'm kind of everywhere at the moment, but that'd be nice. Be a friendo, be cool guy friendo, hitting that big old button. Thanks, appreciate it. GG.